I was raised in the backwoods of Western Virginia, on the foothills of Appalachia. Scientists say it's one of the oldest mountain ranges in the world, at over 1.2 billion years old. There's history in these hills, is a common saying among Appalachian folk. My father was born in Appalachia as well, and he's most certainly a product of this place as much as anyone I've ever known. Because we live so far from town, about a 20-minute drive to the nearest gas station, and then another 30 to town where I went to school, my father did a lot of hunting to carry us through times when we couldn't make a trip to the grocery store, or when we didn't have enough money. I never took up hunting the way my father did. Computers were more my thing. But even still, I remember the things he used to tell me about where we lived and why it was so important to be careful when you're alone in the wilderness. Always respect the forest, he would tell me, right after taking a long drag off his signature Marlboro Red. I never understood how he could hunt anything when he always reeked of cigarettes. I thought for sure the animals could smell him from a mile away. Experience, as it turns out, was the answer. My father dropped out of school at a very young age. He doesn't like to talk about it very much. I think because he now regrets never finishing school, so I don't press the subject. After he dropped out, he moved to his grandmother's nearby farm, where he spent most of his childhood. Hunting comes naturally to someone raised like that, I suppose. Sometimes this will mean respecting the fact that you won't always be welcome. The forest was here before you, and it will be here long after you've left. You're a guest, so act accordingly, he would say. After the first time he told me this, I started realizing that he always put his cigarette butts into his coat pocket, never on the ground. At first, I thought it was because it's a fire hazard, which it obviously is. But I had never considered the alternate, that he did this to be respectful to the forest. There are many dangerous things in these woods, but never make the mistake of assuming that the most dangerous thing in the woods is yourself, especially when you're armed. It's all too easy to let your guard down when you think you're the apex predator. Bears, wolves, mountain lions. Those are the images that flashed through my mind when he told me this. Which made sense. We lived so far out in the woods that bear and wolf sightings were not that uncommon. I don't think there were any mountain lions out there, but a young me didn't know any better. And one more thing. Never answer a call for help. Especially if it sounds like someone you know, or if the call uses your actual name. Just know, it's a trap. Turn around and leave. Quickly, he would say. And it's that last one that always gave me chills. He never said more than just that. Interestingly, despite everything my father had told me, I never once felt unsafe when I was home alone, or even when it was just my younger brother and I. When you live that far out in the boonies, most of the time you have to make your own fun. There was neither cell reception nor internet, so my brother and I would often be outside, in the woods, or in the creek. We built dams, skipped rocks, climbed trees, and sometimes just dug really big holes for no reason. Just like every other rambunctious brotherly duo would if given a backyard that stretches out as far as the eye can see. The land, by official record, was less than 2 whole acres. It wasn't much, but it had been a wedding gift from my grandparents, and it was where my father began construction of our home. My mother often told me stories about how she spent many nights sleeping on an air mattress on the concrete foundation of our house, the wind whistling through the unfinished frame of the house, keeping her awake at night. My father was a carpenter by trade, and he'd built our house almost entirely by himself, with just the help of a few personal friends as needed. My father was the kind of person who thought it was foolish to pay someone for a service when you were capable of doing it yourself. The manifestation of that belief was a picturesque A-frame house, and where I would live for the first 16 years of my life. But not once did I ever feel like a guest there. That place was my home. Fast forward to the last year, to when I was hanging out with one of my good friends, who similarly lives far out in the boonies, although not in the same area. He told me that he and a few other friends had started seeing some weird things in the wood line near his house. They investigated, but never turned up with anything. That is, until one night, a few weeks after they'd stopped seeing weird things for a while. One person said he saw it. He had just stepped outside to use the bathroom and had walked up to the wood line, drawers unzipped, when he heard his girlfriend's voice coming from deep in the woods, calling his name, yelling for his help. He froze, recognizing it immediately. He knew it couldn't be her. She'd just dropped him off and had left to go back home. But regardless, doubt crept in. He looked up, searching for the origin of the voice, but he couldn't find it until he leaned a bit and his angle changed. And then there, peeking out from behind a thick, dead tree, was a figure. It looked thin, with skin as white as chalk and malnourished. Its solid black eyes were fixed on him. Neither he nor it moved for what he said felt like an eternity, until he'd shaken off some of the shock and tried to slowly step backwards. But it followed, and in sync with his movements. He was far too afraid to turn and run, so for every blind step backwards, it took a measured step forward. He took another step, but instead of hearing the crunch of dead leaves, this time, he felt weightlessness. There was a tall bank at the woodline, and he had just stepped off the edge. He struggled to find purchase on the muddy bank and fell onto the gravel road, but he shot back up again and ran for the house. He said he never looked back to see if it had chased him. After he calmed down and his adrenaline had worn off, our collective curiosity got the better of us. The rest of us crept into the kitchen and pulled back the curtains on the window, looking out towards the woodline. But none of us saw anything. It wasn't until a few days later that the puzzle pieces in my brain actually clicked together. I think what my friend saw that night was the same thing my father had warned me about all those years ago. It's unsettling to think about, especially considering that I'd never put much stock in the paranormal or the otherwise spooky and unexplained. I prefer the realm of science instead, the realm where logic and math rule, and things that go bump in the night scurry away underneath the harsh light of rationality and intuition. But despite my preference, I find the paranormal absolutely fascinating. And the scientist in me is begging to know more. So we've decided that we're going to investigate. All of us. And hopefully get to the bottom of some of the strange things that seem to happen around here. They say curiosity killed the cat. But they also say cats have 9 lives. But not me. I've only got 1 life. And enough curiosity for all 9 cats.